Toronto Maple Leafs have made multiple surprising moves ahead of a huge game tonight against the Montreal Canadiens. We also have several updates regarding the Leafs, including one for Jake McCabe. We also have some interesting quotes from the players, really highlighting how important this game tonight is, and what they had to say may surprise you as well. Stay tuned for all that in this episode, but before we get into it, if you're part of the 71% who aren't subscribed to the channel, it's the place to be for daily Leafs content. Your guys' support has been unbelievable. If you're a part of that percentage who aren't subscribed, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We will be live following tonight's big game, so make sure to stay tuned for that. There's obviously a ton of updates to go over today. The Leafs play the Montreal Canadiens. They're on the second night of a back-to-back, and this would really help secure the Atlantic Division. And the matchups are starting to become more and more set now, of course, with 4 games left for the Leafs. It's going to start to get very, very interesting. Let's dive right into it now. A bunch of updates to go over today. But I want to start with the big one here. And this is from Jake McCabe. We also have some other things. So he is out tonight, as we know, but he is on the ice for the Leafs optional skate this morning, which is another sign in the right direction. If you missed our video yesterday, came out and basically Craig Berube said that their goal is to have him back before the regular season ends for at least the game. And there's only 3 games left after tonight's game. So I would assume he's going to be back sometime early to mid to late next week, some point next week. And this is obviously very good news to see him on the ice ahead of the game tonight, even though he's not playing. Hopefully the Leafs can still get it done, but it's a pretty positive update here.
Definitely a good update. And I mean, we learned yesterday that, he hadn't been skating. He wasn't skating. He's back on the ice this morning. And Berube came out, like you said yesterday, and said that he will be back before the end of the regular season. So he'll probably won't play tomorrow because, again, another back-to-back for the Leafs here. They play again tomorrow against Carolina. But I would imagine he would be in the lineup, next week. So I think that's a good sign. And the fact that he's actually back on the ice and skating, and not just skating by himself, he's back with the group doing things, right? I think that's a good sign. And hopefully he's back, in one of the last 2 games.
Yeah, and David Kampf, on the other hand, if you want an update on him, he skated before the main session, but is also not participating in practice. So you'd have to assume that him and Jake McCabe have similar timelines. So it seems that Jake McCabe is going to be coming back earlier than David Kampf, we assume. But again, it could change. As it looks for the goaltending, you mentioned who would start here. This is the big question marks. They're going with Anthony Stolarz against Montreal and Joseph Woll against arguably the better team in Carolina here. And this is a little bit interesting. It was obviously kind of up in the air. Joseph Woll's he had the last game for the Leafs. So now they're going with Anthony Stolarz. They're not obviously going with back-to-back goaltenders for the back-to-back games. But as we approach now the last few games of the season, it's still fairly up in the air who gets game 1 of the playoffs. I think most people are kind of on the side of Anthony Stolarz, but as it pertains to Craig Berube and making that obvious and making it clear with his decisions, we saw a little bit of Anthony Stolarz have a back-to-back or 3 games in a row. I think it was 2 games in a row, 2 or 3 games in a row there last week. Now we're seeing Anthony Stolarz in net tonight, and in his last 6 starts, which is something that has kind of went under the radar a little bit, he has been absolutely lights out. I mean, he has to be the one who gets the game 1 start, I think, no matter what happens in the last 4 games of this season here. But Joseph Woll has been good as well. And Elliot Friedman came out, like we've been covering, saying it's going to depend on, how they're playing at the time. I think ultimately, regardless of anything, I think Anthony Stolarz is going to be the game 1 starter. But he gets the matchup against the Montreal Canadiens tonight in a pretty important game here. But they gave Woll an equally as important game on Sunday.
Yeah, I think this is actually a bigger test for Joseph Woll tomorrow night because, obviously Anthony Stolarz, I think right now odds are he is going to be the game 1 starter. A lot can change in a week. We've seen it before, but I think odds are he is going to start game 1. But for Joseph Woll, you're going against the better team on the second half of a back-to-back. Let's call it what it is. Like the Carolina Hurricanes are a better team than the Montreal Canadiens. So it's going to be an electric game tonight, that's for sure. But then tomorrow against the Hurricanes, you're tired. The whole excuse of the back-to-backs, which we'll get to in a second because Berube had an interesting quote about that. But second half of back-to-back against a better team heading into the playoffs, I think it's interesting that Woll gets to start tomorrow. So again, I do think it's probably Anthony Stolarz, but anything can change. And last time Woll played against the Hurricanes, he struggled. So this is a good test for him to see what he can do tomorrow. And if he has another really good performance, things can change very quickly. It's, a business of what have you done for me lately? So we'll see what happens. I still think it's Stolarz, but I think it's a good test for Joseph Woll tomorrow.
Yeah, I think it's going to be Stolarz as well. Let's dive into the lines tonight. So based on the practice today, these are lines that are locked in essentially here. And Lawton is going to be playing on the 4th line, which is a very surprising move like we covered yesterday. We have Nyes, Matthews, Marner, Järnkrok, Tavares, Nylander, McMahon, Domi, Robertson, Holmberg, Lorentz, Holmberg, Lawton, and Lorentz. So Lawton moves back to the center position. And the blue line, as you can see, is only 5 players going in tonight. And we have some quotes on that as well. And Scott Lawton, obviously, being on that 4th line in the center position is obviously, I guess, his more natural position technically. I thought he's been playing very well, or was on the 3rd line before getting moved down. And specifically regarding Calle Järnkrok, and if you want to get some insight into what Berube's thinking surrounding his playoff matchups, where he's going to be playing in the playoffs, if he's going to be playing, he said he's still working to get his feet under him. Been out a long time, working his way through it, and he's doing a good job. I do expect him to get to another level yet. So I think the way that he's speaking about Calle Järnkrok, the fact they're moving him up, Berube that is, to the second line, you could probably pencil him in there on next week, a week from today, in theory, in game one of the playoffs, depending on if it's Saturday or Sunday. But yeah, at this point, it seems that Cal Yarncroke is going to be getting in. The way that Berube talks about him, he's always been very high on him. He's a veteran guy, so probably pencil out. We'll obviously have videos on this, but Nick Robertson or Pontus Homer come playoff time, which this quote gave, at least maybe I'm reading between the lines too much here. I think they're going to keep rocking with him in the playoffs.
I think so. I think he's going to be in the lineup. It just depends where. I think right now it's pretty interesting because, when you look at last game against the Tampa Bay Lightning, they moved McMahon down. And I thought McMahon, Tavares, and Nylander were playing really well together. I thought the first two lines, they were not going to be touched heading into the playoffs. I was wrong. They're still tinkering with stuff. And Yarncroke up there on the second line, I do still believe he can get to another level. He missed almost the entire season at this point. He just came back recently, and I think that he can get to another level. But him on the second line, I'm not sure I like that pairing. McMahon on the third line, though, did look good last game. So I wonder if they're just trying to send a message to McMahon. Let's get going here. Let's be more consistent. Play like you're playing on the third line, but on the second line, and then you'll be moved back up, right? So for the playoffs at least. So I think that's kind of what they're doing right now. Maybe it's more of just a message sending to Bobby McMahon, but at the same time, we'll see what happens in about a week's time because a lot can still happen in a week and they're still tinkering with the lines. I thought there was something more solidified, but not the case at this point in time.
Yeah, and that obviously having McMahon on the third line moves Lawton down into the fourth line center position, which is also interesting. So you could technically have him, in Robertson's place or even in Yarncroke's place, but they don't want to move Lawton out of the bottom six there. So let us know down below what your thoughts are on that. And Brewer spoke out on Lane Hudson prior to tonight's game. He said he's a lead player back there. He's hard to handle. He drives a lot of their offense, and he's so good with the puck at transporting it up the ice and doing things in the offensive zone. Very elusive player. That's something that tonight it's going to be interesting to watch. Lane Hudson, Leafs haven't played the Habs in a little bit, especially since Lane Hudson has been on a bit of a tear lately. I'll unfortunately be the first one to admit it, but we can dive into some more quotes here. And this is specifically regarding the attitude ahead of tonight's game against the Canadiens. Like I mentioned in the intro there, they are on the second night of a back-to-back coming off of what was a very bad loss against the Ottawa Senators. And he said, throw that out the window, them being on a back-to-back. That's not going to matter because they're going to be excited to play us here. They always are. They give us a tough game every time we play them. I expect the same tonight, of course. And Stephen Lorentz came out and also spoke. He said, I know people want to see another Canadian team in the playoffs, so we don't care about another Canadian team in the playoffs. We care about our team, and that's it. And it's our job to not let that happen, which is a fantastic quote from Stephen Lorentz, who has definitely penciled himself into the lineup. But it's the Canadiens, they are going to be a very tough matchup for the Leafs. They are very hot. They did lose to the Senators yesterday, which further solidifies the fact that it is almost a foregone conclusion now that the Leafs are going to be playing the Senators in the playoffs. I think it's 90% chance, high 90% chance. But you never know in hockey. Things change on a dime. And if they win tonight, I think this win would go a long way, not only to prove that the Leafs are a better team than the Canadiens. Not that they really need to prove that anyways, but I think they should win tonight's game. But also just as it pertains to the standings, locking yourself basically, virtually into the first Atlantic spot would go a long way, but I don't want them to let up the gas either, although I don't think Berube would complain if they lock in the seed and they have a game off before the playoffs start.
Yeah, the Leafs still have a job to do here. They still have to lock in their position in the standings for themselves. And like Stephen Lorentz said, and Montreal's going to, come hard tonight. Like obviously Craig Berube knows that. They always do against the Toronto Maple Leafs, especially the game in Toronto, right? But I think like Stephen Lorentz said too, like they have an opportunity here to not only like solidify their spot at the top of the Atlantic, but play spoiler, right? Like Montreal, if they got a point last night, they would have essentially clinched their playoff berth this year. But like you said, in hockey, anything can happen, right? So the Leafs can actually play a little bit of spoiler here and prolong things. Do I think that the Canadians are going to miss the playoffs? It's very unlikely. They're probably going to make it, but you can, make them sweat a little bit at this point. If you beat them tonight, it can make it a little bit more interesting. The last thing I want to mention too before we wrap up is Demidov. He's come over and joined the Montreal Canadiens. There's a whole thing about that the other night. He's not playing tonight. I don't know, if he's going to get into a game at this point before the playoffs. I don't know what the plan is for him, but again, that's for the Montreal Canadiens to figure out. But he will not be playing against the Leafs tonight.
Would have been a fun introduction to his NHL career. And one also final thing surrounding using Mitch Marner, like you mentioned yesterday, at the defensive position. I know Mitch has done it before, and he does it on the power play, so he's capable, if we need, of giving us minutes. So it's going to be a fun game tonight to keep an eye out on, a bunch of different things. But yeah, the Canadians need this win just to kind of guarantee their spot. And also, they were trying to chase the Senators. It's still technically possible, so maybe they can go and do that. And for the Leafs side, you win tonight, you basically, you need to win every game at this point. And hopefully they can win enough games to maybe give themselves a day off, because as it pertains to the schedule, you have maybe 2 or 3 games off between the last game of the regular season and the first game of the playoffs against whatever team it is, most likely the Senators. But that'll wrap it up. We'll be live following tonight's game, so let us know what your thoughts are. See you guys later.